Hello and welcome to another Mastering Dungeons. I am here with my co-host, Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos.
Hey, Shawn. I am ready to master at least one dungeon.
If not more. If not, we have to master at least two.
Sometimes one leads to another. So
that's true. That is true. As the fix so gracefully told us back in the 80s, one thing does indeed lead to another.
Now that's in my head. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Everyone else's.
You're welcome. So let's hop right into the news with a lot of news about this Magic the Gathering D&D crossover. The first bit of news is an adventure has been released called In Scarlet Flames. And it was released on the Magic the Gathering site, as well as the D&D site, I believe. And it is by Will Hindmarch, and it's an adventure for 4 to 6 characters of level 8. It is set in the high moors of Faerun and features the machinations of the Red Wizards of Thay. It's a 14-page adventure that promotes the upcoming Magic the Gathering Forgotten Realms set, and it claims to be the first in a series, which will be released weekly. I did take a quick gander at it. I was excited to see Will Hindmarch involved because he's an excellent game designer, and reading over the intro, everything seemed fine. So, would you like to tell us what is involved in this adventure?
Yeah, it's a story, and this is just going to give you like the barest of spoilers. Like it's not really a problem, but there is a mage from another world, which we would guess is the Magic the Gathering world, yes, that has come for some reason to this area to like retrieve valuables, and somehow 2 Red Wizards hear about this and pursue him. They hire a group to take them to this old barrow where the people who have been hired to take them realize these wizards are probably going to kill us, and they run off. Mm-hmm. And that's how you hear about all this, is you can meet those folks who say, hey, for a small fee, we'll take you to where these Red Wizards went. They wanted some sort of loot. We wanted no part of it. And then the bulk of the adventure is the interaction with this old lair and uncovering what happened to the 2 Red Wizards. And it clearly leads to more later. There's sort of a portal at the end. And it's got some interesting mechanics around traps. If you like traps, it has some sort of clever ideas on how to use those in ways that aren't just the usual like perception kind of check method.
Yeah. And it states right up front that we're not telling you the whole story in this adventure. So if you go in, if you're one of the DMs that wants the whole story before you start running something, you might want to wait, because we just get the hook that this mage is from another world. So I'm sure, as Teos said, that will be where the Magic the Gathering stuff comes into play. But other than that non-statement of Magic the Gathering, there really isn't much mention of magic at all. At least in what I've read, there's none.
No, it's and I was thinking it might be a little more, because these replace the stories and fiction that usually show up to announce a set. I thought this might have a little more focus on the lore. The characters are learning about planeswalkers or something like that. But it is not in that way, other than just a very some wizards have been here doing things.
Right.
It's at that very level. But there are neat things, like the kind of big battle, if you will, is interesting in that your goal is not simply fighting. Mm-hmm. And it has a sort of fun mechanic to it as to how you deal with that, which is kind of typical, I think, Will Hindmarch design to sort of have it be different and very creative, and I like that.
Yeah,
the monsters that are there have sort of neat reasons for being there that aren't the usual and we're here to oppose you, which is cool.
Right. I have a question for you. Maybe you can answer. The first thing I always do when I read an adventure over is read the summary, read everything in the beginning. Then I start seeing the numbers. Okay, room 1, room 2. So I flip quickly to the map to see what the size and shape of the map is. And when I flipped to the map, it only had areas 13 through 16 mapped out, and the rest was sort of not there, or it was sort of an overview, but it didn't give actual areas. did I miss something, or is the map not the map of those specific areas not there?
You might be right. Okay. I did. I usually go back and forth between map and adventure. It's one of those things where the maps are usually at the end, and you're trying to visualize what it is. In this case, as I was reading it, I did not look at the map until the very end, and all I remember is thinking, that map's smaller than I expected.
Yeah.
And I never did the math on it only covers that area. So maybe it deliberately is only providing. Yeah, it is interesting. You think it would show all of the rooms.
Yeah, and it's not a big deal because, like I said, I haven't read it completely through. Maybe they just expect the DM to make their own map for that area. But there is an overview map, and then there is a specific map of the final few rooms. But the areas 1 through 12 aren't actually mapped out, so I was just curious. All right, I mean, it wouldn't slow me down from running the adventure. I was just the only thing that I would comment on this from a design perspective is, we're guessing. We said this last episode. It's semi high level, 8th level, because that allows you to show all these grandiose monsters that the cards are going to feature, and probably spells and devices and things like that. And that makes sense, but if you're going to be pulling in people who primarily do Magic the Gathering, then that's a hurdle to overcome. And one of the things I looked for is, well, does this adventure address that? And it doesn't. It's not written like an intro adventure necessarily, especially speaking to, 8th level play, or, there are no pre-gens included, or link to the pre-gens that already exist on the Wizards of the Coast site, right? There's none of that. Here's how to get the free rules, and that's one of those, I'm like, man, I want to speak to the project manager and say, see the larger picture of your audience, and try to speak to those new people and bring them in, because that's a new audience you're tapping into there, and they might just pick this up and go wow, this looks complicated. I don't get it. Yeah, they and it's on the Magic site, not the D&D site, so that also adds a little bit of question to it. But hey, it seems like an interesting adventure. I would be more than happy to run it. So hopefully the future installments of the adventure will be equally compelling.
Yeah.
Next, HarperCollins has announced some new D&D books. You just saw this news, so I will let you speak to it.
This dropped as we were recording. They have announced an agreement with Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast to release a new line of D&D middle grade books. I think this means for the middle grades of school, which will include novels, illustrated chapter books, and graphic novels. It launches this fall with Dungeon Academy, No Humans Allowed, if that doesn't tell you the age grouping. Pre-orders available already. I guess it's on Amazon and sites like that. Set in the Forgotten Realms, it stars a young girl named Zelly who enters a prestigious academy for monsters while disguised as a minotaur. We can all relate.
Sure.
Zelly eventually sets out on a quest to find out her true lineage while accompanied by a vegan owlbear, a kobold, and a mimic. And I love this.
Right.
I want to criticize it, and I can't. I mean, that's just beautiful.
Right. A vegan owlbear, a kobold, and a mimic walk into a cafeteria.
Right. It's perfect. I mean, This is great. This is exactly what I want. It's followed in release by a Dungeons & Dragons Harper Chapters book series. So I guess Stories of the Harpers. Scheduled for release in winter 2022. And then a graphic novel series by Molly Knox Ostertag and Xanth Bouma, with the first release planned for fall 2022. So that's neat. That's more of your, reaching out to different audiences. You see it on the shelves. What is this? What is this Dungeons & Dragons stuff? I mean, a lot of us from back in the older days started with that kind of thing, with things like Choose Your Own Adventure books. So that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it doesn't have to appeal to everybody as long as it appeals to somebody.
Indeed.
So there we go. Dragon Plus issue 38 is out. It includes an overview of recent news regarding the Wild Beyond the Witchlight and Strixhaven, information that we've touched on in previous episodes, a video highlight for the WotC streams, previews of the Magic the Gathering cards focusing on dragons, an interview with Peter Atkinson and Steve Conrad on the influences of D&D on Magic the Gathering, which would be interesting considering the milieu that we're currently in. James Wyatt and Jules Robbins look at how it's taken decades to get this Magic the Gathering set made, and you can totally understand, James, who's worked both in D&D and in Magic the Gathering for years trying to put this together and make this synergy happen and finally coming to fruition. I'm so happy for him, not to mention for all D&D fans.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't quite hear the pain in their voice when you read the words on the page, but it's in there somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and they talked about the Dominaria Bestiary that was considered for 3rd edition and then never happened. With 5e, they were able to get info on Zendikar as a D&D world published for free on the DM's Guild.
Yeah, and there's a funny line there where they talk about how it's sort of what they say is, we ran around the office seeing if anyone opposed this.
Right.
That's kind of the wording, right?
Yeah.
It's not like we pitched this, everybody thought it was a great idea. It's like nobody blocked us, so we threw out this free Zendikar thing on the DM's Guild and then kept going and building up momentum.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, and good for them, right? It's better to ask forgiveness and permission. Sometimes it's true.
Nobody said not to.
Yeah, exactly. There's information in Dragon Plus issue 38 on using Magic the Gathering cards as inspiration in your D&D game. Crowdsourced trinkets for your Ravenloft games, D&D virtual play, and how it includes the new Mist Hunters campaign. And Best of the Guild looks at the Warlock patrons, free downloads of one product and coverage of a YouTube series called The Dungeon Masters Guildhouse, which highlights products on the DM's Guild. And finally, concept artist Shawn Wood has an interview. He is a concept artist for the D&D team.
Yeah,
and,
interestingly, they did not have the kind of classics section or the maps section, so we'll see if those come back later.
Yeah. Speaking of Magic the Gathering, you talked with our friend Dave Chalker about how to approach this new Magic the Gathering set as a D&D fan. And what did Dave have to say?
So Dave is a game designer who loves Magic the Gathering, loves D&D. He has, he's lived in both worlds. He is a planeswalker, as I understand. So I said, Dave, tell me, if you were going to try to buy this new D&D set, how does this all work, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to get into this. And so I'm going to share this with listeners who may be mostly in the D&D world, but are thinking, gee, I want to buy these cards. And so what Dave shared the following wisdom, which I will now relate. And the first thing is thinking through, what is your purpose with these cards? Like, if you just want a pack of cards, there are a number of ways to get that without any big whoop. If you just want to have a few to be like, cool, look, I have D&D cards. But if you want to play, then there's another level. And then the last level is if you want to collect like the full set. Like if you're like, I want to have all the D&D cards, then that gets tricky. So thinking through your purpose is your first step. And a good buy, kind of regardless, but especially if you're looking more for play, are what are called commander decks. And commander decks are pre-built decks of cards that are fully functional and fun, and there are 4 of them, and they're made so that they play well together. They're balanced and they're interesting in how they oppose one another. So if you buy these 4 commander decks, you can now give a deck to your friend and you can play, and it's fun and it all works. You get all the land you need, everything you need to have a really good game, and it'll give you a good sampling of that theme. Each deck has 100 cards, including 2 legendary foil cards. There's a foil-etched commander card, which is a special card that does enable your deck to do things. 10 double-sided tokens, a life wheel, and the deck box. So that's all you need if you just want to play a bit. If your goal is to own most of the cards, well, it's not like maybe if you know miniature collecting where you buy a case and you get one of every rare and plenty of the others. There's no such thing in the Magic the Gathering world. They are far more aggressive with your money. The way it works there is you are not going to get everything. There are not only many rares and uncommons and commons and all that sort of business, but then there are foil versions and there are mythic rares and there are alternate art versions of everything. So the chase is a long one. But what you can do is buy what are called set boosters. These are boxes of the kind of packs you may be used to seeing in a store. And if you buy one or two of those, you would have a pretty good amount of cards. And then you can decide what else you want to buy and probably buy those as individual cards to fill up your set. If you want to be more aggressive, you can buy our special sort of boosters that are art packs. And those have more rares and more of the stranger art cards, but it costs a whole ton more. So you've got to have a big wallet to buy like, a box at $250 of those. A box of the other set boosters is like, I think 130, something like that. I'm going by memory. So none of this is cheap, but if you're really going down the collector path, then that set boosters is the way to go. You can also get draft boosters if you're looking for playability. Those are like booster packs, but they're made for the idea of playing draft play, where you pass the pack around and everybody chooses a card and you're mixing it up as you play. That's a lot of fun, but it's an investment to do that and not as suited for just trying to build up your collection. There is also what's called a bundle box. There is one out now, and there will be another one out, I think, in August, which includes a D20, 10 booster packs, 3 oversized dungeon cards, which are really cool because that's a central feature of the game. And they kind of go out, on the play mat where everybody can see them. 20 foil basic lands and a few other fun bits. And that's more of like a fun purchase to have if you want it. I think it's like $50. And the second version will have a different D20 and probably different foil cards. Then you can just go crazy with deck boxes, play mats, you name it, that are all themed around this set. There is a Magic article that we'll link in the show notes that walks you through the different types of cards, including amazing Flumph art, which is really all you need to know about the set. And then a product overview as well with some of the information that I just shared as well.
Yep. That was Flumph art, not Flumph fart. Just to be clear.
I mean, they're related.
Really, you could probably have both cards.
One may always feature the other. I mean,
it's true. Awesome. Well, thank you for that rundown.
Thanks, Dave.
And thank you, Mr. Chalker, for your expertise. Switch gears here, the Indie Game Developer Network, the IGDN, has created draft guidelines for processional standards and practices.
I think that's supposed to be professional.
Okay. I can read. It's fine. So the IGDN, as the name says, it's a network of game developers and game development companies that are more indie, and they are, as a professional organization, come together to get things done for their members. And so they've created this document that contains information and guidelines for those wanting to work in the tabletop hobby. The information in this document includes the different types of jobs that you can get in the industry, proper conduct, minimum wages by country, how to calculate a reasonable minimum fee for a number of the words you're asked to write. They assume writing 2,000 words a day, which is a good amount of words per day. If you're doing that, you're doing professional work at that point.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to mention about this document?
No, it's a good. I think it's worth anyone that works in the field should take some time to look over this. And it is in draft status, so they are looking for you to read it over. I think you might not even be able to download it. I think you just read it on the site, and then there is a link for you to provide feedback. And their hope is to publish this in the fall. And they established these sort of like bronze, silver, and gold levels of pay. And what they are hoping to do is to reach out to companies and have these publishers opt in as being either bronze, silver, or gold, so that people can find them and sort of match up creator and publisher, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah. Yep. So that is out there. There's a link in the show notes for it, for you if you're interested to go take a look and give them your feedback if you so choose. This next one is right in Teos' wheelhouse, literally. Dwarven Forge is releasing the free Wildlands Bestiary. So tell us all about this.
Yeah. In a recent stream, one of the main Dwarven Forge folks, Nate, almost revealed what I recently wrote for the series of adventures that, if folks know, they release Kickstarters around their awesome terrain, and then they release adventures to support them, and those are all available free on their website. It started with Dungeon of Doom. It went into their Caves Kickstarter, and now for their most recent Kickstarter, Wildlands, what they're doing now is releasing free monsters, and then an adventure will follow. And so he did not spill the beans on the adventure, so I can't either, which is a shame because it is pretty fun. And I was not the only writer. That was also mentioned. It's a whole team this time. So that will be coming. But for now, you can get a PDF for free with 23 creatures and plants you can drop into any 5e campaign. They were created by the Dwarven Forge team. They're all laid out beautifully, play-tested, and will likely be seen in that upcoming adventure. So,
sweet.
Fun way to get some neat creative monsters. And the Dwarven Forge team, they don't play things normally. Like they have wacky, wild, fun ideas, which is what's great about these monsters.
Okay. Looking forward to that. And one thing you can do with Dwarven Forge terrain is really lay into some traps. And
Indeed.
Greg Marks has written another installment in what is becoming one of my favorite series, the Kobold Press Trapmaster series. The newest one from Greg is Location, 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 where his blog post looks at devious traps that force characters to move around in some way. Because one of the hardest things to do, of course, with a trap is to get the players and their characters into the trap. And so Greg looks at different ways of moving or having the trap move the characters to make the trap even more devious. Like, for example, the first trap he talked about is a pit trap, but falling into the pit trap actually transports the character that fell in somewhere else. So the rest of the characters are looking around going, where did Bob go? And at the bottom of the pit is a lever. So, of course, they're going to go down and probably pull the lever, and then other things happen. So it's sort of ways to coax the characters into doing the thing that are of importance to the trap. Another example that Greg gives is a trap where there's a pillar rising out of a lake of lava, and maybe something cool on the pillar, or just the pillar is the obvious way across the lake. But there's an invisible barrier on the pillar, so runes can be dispelled. The barrier can be detected with magic and disintegrated or deactivated to then allow the players to get onto that pillar. Did you have anything else of note about that?
Yeah, I love them. They're very funny, and it reminds me. Nate Taylor of Dwarven Forge also came up with one that we did in Dwarven Forge, where there's the pit trap that you can jump, and there's clearly bad stuff in the bottom, spikes and things like that. So jumping over it is the obvious thing, but there's an invisible wall at the end. So if you jump, you hit it, because especially in 5e, the jump rules are so easy that as long as you have a 10 strength, you can cover 10 feet.
Right.
So if you don't test or think, you're going to slam into it and fall into the pit anyway, which is fun for everybody at the table. A good laugh will be had. But if they do detect it, then you feel sort of rewarded, and now you've got to figure out, well, what do I do about this barrier, right? And I think that's just that's such fun design, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I added a trap like that to a combat in an old Living Greyhawk adventure, and I ran it several times, and it was just the most gleeful thing every time to have these characters get a running start, leap over the obvious trap into the wall, fall prone at the feet of the enemy that's waiting there. Just so wonderful. So wonderful. Yep. So, continue. If you haven't read these blog posts by Greg on the Kobold Press site, do so, because they're all wonderful and all talk very mechanically about ways to use traps to their utmost. So, go for it. Evil Hat and Roll20 are teaming up to offer safety tools. Evil Hat has a safety toolkit, and Roll20 has now taken that and worked it into their system to give you, for free, decks of cards and macros for the X card and script change, a game palette page with lines and veils, and then a handout explaining how to use all of them. So, for free, you can add all of these safety tools directly to your Roll20 game.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I was recently in a game where someone had something like this, and I was thinking, that's neat. I'm going to have to figure out how they did that. And now I don't have to because I just simply went and downloaded this for free, and now I have these available for my games. Sweet.
Yep. There you go. And last bit of news, the Adventurers League team has released their information, including the list of adventures and authors and when the adventures would be released for the Ravenloft Mist Hunters campaign, a campaign that Teos and I are going to play on Sunday.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
Me
That's
too.
Very cool.
I get to play D&D again, and I get to play with you, and that's going to be great. And with Zombie Joe as our DM, that'll be even better. It's going to be wonderful.
Yeah, and I was just talking to GM Tim yesterday, who was on the show for the Icewind Dale review. And actually, both of our guests from that show are writing for this series. We're revealed as writers.
Oh, yeah.
And Tim was telling me about the emphasis on story and just nothing. He didn't spoil anything, but just was talking about how neat it was is, because some of them are still writing or finishing up writing, how neat it is to design that way and think differently. So I'm really curious to see how this all feels. And the event that's at the virtual weekend is an epic. And I think also the first adventure is also available at the event.
Yep. Yeah, the other writer that was on the show with us was Marcelo de Velasquez, who is also one of the writers for that that series, and as well as a bunch of other, obviously several of the DDEAL admins that will be writing the initial adventures, and then a great team backing them up. So I'm excited to see how it goes, and like Teos said, it should be a new and different experience in how it's run. So we're looking forward to that as well.
Yeah, and alternate campaigns are always a nice way to like get in, play something in its own little confined way. You don't feel like everybody's old hat and you're jumping into something that everybody fully knows. This is a great time to try out some organized play, especially if you like story-heavy stuff. And everybody's going to be on equal footing because everybody's creating new characters. In fact, if you sign up for the Epic event, you will make characters as part of this. So pretty neat.
Yep.
And you know what, Shawn? I have one more thing that I can add.
All right.
Which is that starting today, which will be this week when the recording drops, I will be on the Saving Throw show doing a Modifius Dune stream, playing the Dune RPG, and that should be pretty fun. So if folks like it, check out the Saving Throw show on Twitch or YouTube, and you'll be able to catch this week's series. It's a learn to play series, so you will see how we go about creating a house, which will be our first step in creating a house in the Lancerad. And then we will create characters and all of that. So you don't need any knowledge because, in fact, we have very little knowledge.
And also of the game, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm reading rereading Dune right now.
Me too.
In preparation for the movie as well as the game. So I'm going to definitely check that out and see. Do you know if it uses the 2D20 system that Modifius uses? Does it? Okay.
Yeah, cool. It's so if you've seen Star Trek Adventures, it uses that same type of system. It's the kind of Modifius 2D20 system, and a lot of it will be very similar in terms of that whole threat determination, momentum type approach.
Cool.
So I have not played that system before, so I'm looking forward to getting to know it better.
I am going to have to set aside a bit of time to watch that. And so is it live streamed or is it recorded?
Yeah, it is live streamed, and then
goes up on Twitch.
Yeah,
all right.
Exactly.
So you can watch that, as Teos said, on the Saving Throw show Twitch. Awesome. So let's talk about Chapter 2 of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. We finished Chapter 1 last time, looking at all of the various character options. So this time we are going to get into the chapter that talks about creating domains of dread. So this is for all the DM/world builders out there. A quick shout out to Richard Green, because he is continuing on his website, which is richardgreengames.com, to talk about how to use these chapters for these chapters and the concepts in Van Richten's guide with his adventure from Cobalt Press, Empire of the Ghouls. So if you want to see sort of what we're talking about also in action, you can go over to richardgreengames.com and look at Rich Green's work there.
Yeah.
So with Chapter 2, we're going to talk, as I said, about creating a domain of dread and creating a Darklord to rule over that domain. just to give sort of a high level view, I thought this was an absolutely wonderful chapter.
Agreed.
It has such great information. As I was reading it, I started thinking, you know what, I'm going to use this in my college class, not only as a way to show you how to build a world or build an adventure or build a story, but build anything, right? Build RPG worlds, build all of these things, because the information and the tips that they give can work for short stories. They can work for anything creative that you build a larger story or setting around. The other thing I wanted to say before we start was keep in mind that we're going to be talking about Darklords and the domain a lot. But behind all of this are these dark powers. And it's the dark powers that are really the bad guy, even though there are intermediate bad guys, these Darklords. The Darklords are victims as much as anything, even though they're irredeemable victims.
Right.
So even if you defeat a Dark Lord, you always have to be thinking in the background, what are these dark powers? Why did they allow this Dark Lord to die? There's always that one more layer to think of as you're thinking of creating these domains and these Dark Lords. Okay, with that said,
go ahead. I want to feed off of that, Shawn, because that's a great point. Two really good points that I've been mulling over heavily as I read this book. One is, what do we really want to do with these dark powers as a DM? Because one possibility is to, sort of like the original Ravenloft adventure, you don't say anything about it, right? It's just you play that adventure, and a few years later you might play it again. And we usually think of that as just rerunning the adventure. But really, in canon, you can canonically play it again because the dark powers reinstate Strahd, right? Strahd does not actually die unless you choose to make it that way in your game. And do you want to, in any way, reveal that in some way to your players is an interesting question. Do you want to at all design for that concept to reflect that? Do you want to, let the players peer behind the curtain a bit and know, hey, these people are reincarnated, this world resets.
Mm-hmm. Right. And if you choose to not do that, why? And why did the dark powers allow it? So, Ravenloft is a world where you can't win. It's a little bit, you can have what you think is the win, right? You can defeat the Dark Lord. You can even shut down a domain, but the dark powers are still there, and there's no stat block for the dark powers. Right. So they are the villain in the long run, and the players, as Teos said, never have to know that. But as you're thinking in these layers of creating a Dark Lord, creating a domain, putting together the story, always just keep that in the back of your mind, and you can hint at things like that, because there's some horror for you, right? There's some dread for you, which is you won this time, but you can't win every time.
Yeah. And I don't just my individual take on games and so on, I don't super love that. But what I do really like about the Ravenloft world, the mists, the way all this works, is that your villain is a prisoner, and that adds a horror aspect to it, because they are not above the situation. They are part of it. They are suffering too. But in all the cases, they deserve that. It's not a question, this is not a thing about where you redeem them or you save them or you feel bad for them, because I think we have a lot of that these days, of sort of like the dark villain from the comic book series. Well, let's show what happened to them, and let's somehow have like a tender side of that's why they mass murdered. Right. Exactly. I don't like that at all. And so I like that in Ravenloft, these are irredeemable. Like, you're getting a taste of really horrible things they've done. And even though they are tortured and part of, the play of these dark powers, they deserve this, and they deserve to be faced off against by the heroes and defeated. Like, that is what, no hero just says, oh, the world resets, I should walk off. Like this, you do, while you may not win in the long run, you do need to take this immediate step if you are a hero.
Sure. And there is even a step in the process of that thinking about not only who was the villain before they became the Darklord, but why are they irredeemable? So you, as the creator, get to come up with that reason.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to come out in the story, although it's stronger, obviously, if it does come out. With
and maybe to tie things in, the reason why we're talking about these big concepts is because this chapter very cleverly says to design a domain, which is what this chapter is about, you must start with the Darklord.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so to start with the Darklord, here are the steps that are taken. We've already talked about the idea that the Darklord is both the villain but also a prisoner. So the first thing they do, and I love this right away, is tie the Darklord's characteristics to the characters as much as possible. So while you're coming up with the Darklord, you can and should, if possible, take clues from the characters' flaws, bonds, ideals, and so on. So you get the idea of what is important to a certain character, and then you create a sinister reflection of that. So if one character is all about duty and will do anything for the cause, the Darklord was the same way, but they took it to the extreme that they can now no longer see the tree for this big forest they're in.
Right.
They're just going to do what they think is right, even if it means destroying everything around them.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of a sinister reflection.
Yeah.
You want to continue?
Yeah, and
with
you
the
can
list?
also play off the opposite, right? So if someone is a champion of virtue, then it's great to give them a foil, right? And make them the bad guy that really will register with you. So you can either take what someone is and take it further and twist it, or you can play off the opposite. And that's a fantastic way to do this. Very cool. Yep. The other thing they go into next is past life. The idea that Darklords have a past, a family, a childhood, these things, the experiences that they went through, and that is integral to this domain. Whatever they've gone through, the reasons for their downfall, the horrible things they did, all of that should be woven in here and be part of this setting. And the best domains, when you look at the examples in the book, or if you look at Strahd, it all has to do where at first glance you just think like, oh, Strahd is this evil guy who lusts after this particular woman. Mm-hmm. But when you uncover the tragic story and learn all of the trade-offs he made poorly
mm-hmm. Right.
in an attempt for love, and how this cycle repeats and plays over and over again, and then that feeds into everything else about the setting and helps define the setting. And so in that same way, we can think through what the past life is and what they did, which is cool.
Mm-hmm. They give tips on using the Taroko deck, if you have that at your disposal, to draw a card and use that as an inspiration for the past of your character. They also give personality traits, including fatal flaws. So there is a chart where you can roll or select some wicked personality fatal flaw traits.
Yeah, but there's some neat examples there. Once someone questions me, I won't stop until I befriend them and then betray them.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great adventure there, right? A great adventure seed of that there's going to be a point where the bad guy tries to tempt the characters or a character into becoming a friend. All of that's there. And then we get to the point where they say, remember that the Darklords are deeply evil. You can always have to remember that, even if it was a seemingly innocent mistake that led to a part of their downfall. Their downfall has to be their choice. It has to be significant. All of that needs...
And it harmed people.
Exactly.
And that's a big part, because that's something that we see in a lot of these domains where, it's Mask of Red Death type scenarios. We see it in classic stories, right? Whether it's mummies or Frankensteins or any of that, where you make these bad decisions, Jekyll and Hyde, and people suffer as a result of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are bound to those people that you hurt as a Darklord.
Yep. They talk about monstrous transformations. So not only is the Darklord evil in their soul, there's generally some sort of physical transformation that goes along with it. And the more that you can tie the physical transformation to the evil, the corruption that's within the Darklord or the evil acts that they did, so much the better.
Yeah, there's some creepy ones. They give a list of 10 of them, as well as some, collaborating information. But there's some really horrid ones in here, and so it's great because as you're thinking through what they might have done and what their domain might be, and then you look at these transformations, that can really shape up the story. Mm-hmm. And I think whatever you're transforming them into can then be possibly things that you are seeing in the domain as well, right? So if they are, I don't know, if they're clouds of insects that come out of their mouth, like one of these suggestions, then you can think about, well, maybe this is a swamp area, and you can just start building from there. It's full of ideas. I love it.
If this Darklord starved people, maybe one of the Darklord's curses is he or she has to eat constantly. Something like that.
And maybe the surrounding village is constantly, trying to secure resources, and so you start learning about this kind of.
Exactly. Yep. And so, all of that goes into the creation of the Darklord. Any more on the Darklord you want to mention before we talk about the domain?
It ends with the birth of a Darklord, and the idea here is to think about what was that greatest irredeemable act that sort of sealed the deal and dragged them and their land into the mist to create the domain. That can also be helpful in your creation process.
There you go. So once you have the Darklord, then you can go about creating the domain that will be the prison of the Darklord, but also the setting of the adventures that you're going to be running. Yeah. And that's equally important. If you've listened to this podcast for a long time, you've heard me mention before Edgar Allan Poe's theory of unity of effect. And that's really what we're going to be talking about here is you got the theme. So now take every single thing that you put into the domain and make it tie back to that theme, whether directly or indirectly. It can be very indirect. It can just be sort of a slight touch of that. If we, the whole time I was reading this chapter, I was thinking of what domain would I create if I was going to sit down and create a domain right now. And the first character that came to mind to be a Darklord was Omen Dran.
Yeah.
Not that the character is evil, but could be evil or has tendencies that move evil because of this business, right? So, what would a domain of Omen Dran look like, and what transformations would he come? And so, I started thinking about all the little highlights, all the little details that you could make, right?
Yeah.
Everything is gold, but it's rotting as well.
Yeah, or it's fool's gold, or
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the CEO of Acquisitions Incorporated is an excellent Darklord if they don't change their ways, right? One wonders watching this show as bad choices are made, whether at some point there'll be a redemption, or will Omen continue until the deed that is done is too far gone.
Yeah. So I mean, it was just so cool to start thinking in those terms as I went through this list. So creating the domain, it will, of course, reflect the Darklord, the sights, sounds, smells, and all of that serve as reminders of not just who the Darklord is, but what the Darklord did to become a Darklord. Yeah. So the instructions tell you to choose 3 evil acts that the Darklord committed. Consider those that complement the characters, as we've talked about, and that don't conflict with the boundaries that you've set up for your group. So, go back to your safety tools, go back to the slot 0 discussion to make sure you're not stepping over any bounds. Then for each act, imagine the scene, where it took place, what happened, and then start building the domain referring back to these acts.
Yeah, some really neat pieces. Just that whole idea of before this act took place, what warnings were misread or foreshadowed. And I love the questions like that in this section. Really good things that help you think about how the domain would end up forming and what it might look like. And so with like a Omen Drawn, for example, there's this scene where he not only does he clone one of his quote unquote friends without their permission, but then he trades the clone to Asmodeus, right? And so many other things. And so that aspect of friendship would be something that would certainly come back to haunt, because he has at many points sort of expected people to be loyal and serve and be committed, and yet he will betray them, right, for what he sees as a greater good or gain.
Right. So, there's all of that can go into this domain if you're creating it with this idea of friendship as transaction, or seeing someone's life in terms of money, not necessarily, morally, their value. All of that can be used in a ton of different ways, because the domain is about endless torment. So we're given ideas that help us detail how the domain and the Darklord do not and cannot change, because those choices have already been made. So there's a lot of reincarnation happening in these domains, because people are being tortured, and it's an endless cycle. So maybe one character or one NPC dies and is gone, but one dies, and then a week later they're back. Maybe remembering what happened, maybe not. And that is a clue to, the fact that they are either a victim that will never escape, or a perpetrator who will never escape from these choices.
Wow. It makes me wonder if, because of the pandemic, all the conventions haven't been happening, so all the live plays haven't been happening. So I think when we last left off, it was Icewind Dale. But, maybe we would have also had a Domain of Dread moment. And that would have been really interesting to have seen the Acquisitions Inc. group go through that.
Oh, yeah. I'm all about this. Like I said, it just popped into my head, and I haven't been able to shake it loose.
I can see why.
So as you would for any adventure, then you want to create the locations that the characters may come upon, including all the supernatural angles that you want to include. So it's not just a shop, right? Something weird has to be happening in the shop. It's not just a gold mine. Weird things have to be happening in the gold mine that refer back to the evil that was done that created the place.
Yeah. I would have liked a little more in this section. It's a little light on like there's so much here that feels like world building, but what it doesn't do is really give you guidance on creating that map. Mm-hmm. And I would have liked some ideas, like, for example, to look at the map of the land and think of it as, can the map tell the story of their life? Right. Could it introduce us as we go from, say, a village to a mountain temple to whatever? Could we get a taste of the things they went through, or how to do that with a little more interest? But there's a lot that's great in this chapter, so it's not really a big complaint.
Yep. They talk about cultural specifics, because domains don't need to be functional or even logical. So we get questions that help us establish the dominant cultural feel. So what's the culture of this domain based on the evil that has formed it? So it doesn't have to make sense, right? Food can just appear on people's doorsteps, so you don't need farmland.
Right.
It's all about the weirdness that created the area in the first place. So don't be afraid to take those shortcuts, because you want to highlight this stuff. You don't want to downplay it or water it down with stuff that in a normal world you would need to think about, but you don't need to think about it here.
Yeah. And that can be neat, like if the world is an endless Masquerade Ball, that idea that if you were to mention something about, oh, what's the price of this? Price.
Yeah.
Things just appear. We don't
Right.
we don't pay for these things.
Yep.
Everybody just plays their role, and
Exactly.
we never run out of this, right? And
Yeah.
and those kinds of things, when someone says that to a character, can be so unnerving and creepy, right?
Right.
Which can be fun.
Yep. Then, of course, you probably will want some monsters to go into your domain/adventure. So, select monsters that complement the story that the Darklord, that the story that created the Darklord. So, if you have a mad scientist, you need Frankenstein, you need golems, right? If it's more of a lycanthrope thing, you're going to have werewolves and other lycanthropes. So just think about what monsters fit the theme that you're creating, and don't be afraid to reskin monsters to fit the bill.
Yep. Yeah. So then it goes into the mists, and prompts you to think through how the mists behave, because they can be different in different domains. So maybe there are certain ways that you sense them. The senses are triggered in a particular way. There might be stories that people who live in the domain tell about the mists to sort of explain them in different ways that could be unique based on the characteristics of the domain. I thought that was a neat idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then it gets into adventures.
Yeah, because if you're going to make the domain, probably you're going to have characters that do things there. So when you consider adventures, consider the types of encounters or adventures that would play out in this land. Think through how the Darklord might feel urgent and time sensitive about having the characters in their realm.
That's great advice, because it's easy to detail a world and the players arrive and they just sort of mucking around in it. But that idea that no, Irina has been kidnapped, or it will be kidnapped at any moment, right? Something that's happening. The ball is about to take place. Lightning is flashing in the tower. When that happens, we could all be doomed. That sort of, even though it's cyclical, the characters don't know that. And so arriving with this sense of urgency is fantastic.
Yeah. The one thing that it really didn't mention, that this chapter didn't mention, especially in the adventure section, is what is likely to be the motivating factor for the characters. And that's simply escape.
Yeah.
So if that isn't going to be their motivating factor, you have to give a compelling reason why. Otherwise, the mists come in, the characters try to leave and they can't, and the top of mind is going to be, how do we get out of here?
Right.
So either work that into the story that you are going to be telling with them, or, like I said, give them a compelling reason why that's not the thing that's at the foremost of their mind.
Yeah, and the last thing you want is characters who are sort of off script in that regard, in a non-fun way. Where, if you're thinking, oh, they'll see that the village is hungry and slowly start building up these clues, and what they're really doing is just trying to constantly ask about, yeah, great, I know you don't have food, but how do we get out of here?
Right.
Could you tell us about the town to the north? And it's all off track and just feels wrong. And so you want to present that, which I think why the intro adventure that's in this book that we talked about 2 episodes or so, it provides a note to the characters,
right,
to set them on their path, right? And something like that is really useful. Some reason to say, you are needed. Here's where you're needed. Right? And points them in that direction, and then they might surmise, well, maybe we can escape if we complete this.
Right. And you can always have NPCs lie to the characters. Oh, I know how to get out, but first do blank, whether they know or not. Because every adventure could have a different goal or a series of goals leading to the final thing, which is probably the domain's downfall. And so that's what they talk about next. So you have to link up the Darklord's weaknesses, which make them vulnerable, to the domain itself. Decide whether the Darklord or the domain can be defeated, and whether victory will allow the PCs to escape or move into another domain or something else entirely. So the resolution of your adventure, if it's going to be that final step in the full domain's story, should tie back to the Darklord, should be something that the Mists would allow. And why would they allow it?
Yeah.
Is it because the characters are a more taunting are a more delicious target for the Dark Mists? So the Dark Mists have something in mind for them? Is it because it's going to reset so the dark powers don't care? Just keep that in the back of your mind.
And I tend to think that the reset may sort of reload the torment, right? Like a torment isn't. It can only go but so long in a particular state, and so refreshing it probably makes it heightened, right, in some way. Sure. For the dark powers would be my guess. But I love this advice. I mean, this entire section is absurdly good. I was listening to the Tome Show's coverage of the 5th edition DMG, and there are a lot of places where you're like, well, this is an intro, or it's trying to balance between introducing to new player characters and experienced, and so it's not perfect because it's trying to do a lot. And this chapter is just an example of hitting it out of the park for any kind of audience, whether you're new, experienced, whatever. This is fantastic advice for what it sets out to do. And hats off to everybody who worked on this part, because it's really one of the best examples I can think of this kind of material.
Absolutely. And we'll touch on the next section, which is just the genres of horror. So they talk about the different genres that you can have. And you can, obviously you can mix and match and do different things with each one, but they sort of give you a list of different types of horror to inspire your adventures and your domain creation to maybe focus in on one or two and give it that sort of guidance.
Yeah, and we don't have to go into great detail. They for each one you have monsters that are recommended. Ideas on villains. A lot of this is just tables with checklists that are very useful. They're not bad at all. They're really quite good. So there's things like society preemptively celebrates an achievement the Darklord will never be able to provide. Right. Wonderful. Yeah. Just wonderful storytelling prompt. Settings, inspiration for the locations that work well with the genre. For example, for cosmic horror, an ambulatory forest riddled with glowing eyes. Adventure sites, for example, for folk horror, a hag's hut that stands atop a hill of rotten sweets. Plots, so for ghost stories, solve the murder of a phantom who can say only the words blood, onions, and wine. Yeah. Really, really wonderful writing here. And we get the different types: body horror, our own failing anatomies; cosmic horror, fear of personal insignificance in the face of vast and incomprehensible entities; dark fantasy, grim themes and nihilistic plots; folk horror with traditions and beliefs; ghost stories. I don't know. Any of these stand out to you, Shawn?
The ones that stand out are the ones that are sort of hardest to do in a D&D game.
Oh, yeah? What are those?
Well, like slasher horror. Slasher horror is all about people without really much power to do anything being chased by something that can't be killed. And not many D&D players want that, right? They want to be proactive and accomplished and able to kill something with their sword, with their spells, or if necessary with their wits. So, that doesn't do a lot for me in terms of, you can have certain scenes within an adventure maybe that go to that sort of slasher horror motif, but you don't want a whole campaign set up like that.
Yeah. I think that the easiest thing I can think of is something like the movie Alien, where you have a creature that is relentlessly attacking, but it is really good at getting away, right? If the thing can go insubstantial, or if it can retreat, create darkness and retreat, if it can teleport, things like that, then the players will realize that they must do something else to defeat it.
Yep.
But if it's just a creature that has hit points and attacks, nope, that's not going to work. Yeah. The players will ambush it or do something. They'll pin it down.
Yep. And cosmic horror sort of falls into that realm for me as well, because it talks, cosmic horror is built on the idea that you are just an ant in a cosmos that is a big foot coming down on you. And again, that while it works as a story and as you consume it and think about it, it doesn't necessarily work well as a long-term D&D campaign.
Yeah, it's harder for long-term, though. I think that's where some sci-fi RPGs can give us good inspiration, because sci-fi often has that sort of vast, unknowable threat that you can't just face. And so you're either retreating from it or you're just stopping it, holding it back, sealing it away. And those kinds of things have play in them, right? The abandoned base that's a mind flayer base. What were they doing, right? What dark thing? And then you're stopping it and holding whatever when this horror begins to intrude.
That works. That definitely works.
I thought
for me that falls short of cosmic horror, but that's fine.
Okay. Psychological horror is a tough one, right? The suspense through heightening or calling into question a character's state of mind, emotions, and perceptions. That's a one where it's hard to keep the players from thinking in ways that their characters would not, which is what's often happening in these movies.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You can't, well, you can basically lie to the player to make them play their character in a different way. That does show psychological horror, but then often, since D&D is a game again where characters are supposed to be good at what they do and moving toward their goals and growing in experience and gaining power, to do that to the player is often not seen as fair play. So yeah. But it's all good food for thought.
Terrific chapter.
And wonderful. And then so next time we will look at chapter 3, which are the actual domains that we are given in Ravenloft, and we'll see how all of these tips and all of these concepts that were given in chapter 2 are put to use in the domains that were created for us by the dedicated and creative Wizards of the Coast team.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, this is what we'd heard when the book first released, where they said, gee, everybody was saying, another book coming out. Is this too many? Can Wizards do it? And at least this team has knocked it out of the park, right? This does not read like a team that's stretched thin or that has run out of ideas. So this is a book that's highly creative and top level craft.
Absolutely. So thank you all for listening, and thank you to our patrons who keep the show going. If you would like to become a patron of the show, you can go to patreon.com/MMP, and we appreciate any support. And that support includes just being a listener and maybe sharing our work on social media. And speaking of social media, Teos, where can people follow you?
You can find me on the Twitter at AlphaStream. And check out my blog at alphastream.org. In fact, I think I'm going to take the Magic the Gathering advice and put it up as a blog post as well. So
there you go.
Look for that this week.
And you can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin or on the forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com. You can also follow the podcast itself on Twitter at MasteringDND. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. So, Mr. Abadia, what are we going to do now?
Go kill Omen Dran.
Absolutely.